Hey, do you find yourself interested in witchcraft, but kind of turned off by a lot of what you see on social media, in witchcraft groups or forums on Facebook and other platforms? Well, welcome to my channel. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to share with you 5 cultural challenges of being a postmodern witch in 2021 from my personal perspective. And that's the perspective of being a lifelong 51-year practitioner of secular, non-pagan, non-religious witchcraft, a practitioner of folk magic, Italian esotericism or stregoneria, and more. And I'm going to challenge you to stick around to the end because challenge number 1 might just shock you. So stay tuned. Alchemy. So welcome back and let's dive in. As I said in the beginning, so many people I talk to tell me that they've never really felt connected to what they find on social media in the realm of witchcraft and magic, but they felt connected to magic itself or witchcraft or the esoteric path from a spiritual perspective for most of their lives, sometimes as long as they can remember, even as kids. But when it comes to finding where they fit in, that's where people start to get discouraged. And this can be especially true for people who are less inclined toward religion, since the notion of having to worship gods or goddesses might be off-putting to some people like it is for me. And I get it. I have no use whatsoever for religion per se, and the idea that in order to practice witchcraft, I would have to be initiated into a 20th century religion, posing itself as an ancient religion, which is what every neo-pagan coven represents, would have to run me straight out of Compton, or in my case, straight out of North Philadelphia. So luckily for me, I was raised in a hereditary tradition which, contrary to some of the nonsense that you might see on social media, doesn't mean I was born into a family of witches dating back to the imaginary burning times. I mean, guys, this isn't charms, this is real life. Hereditary traditions mean that I learned a path that predates the 20th century religious constructs of neo-pagan witchcraft. That's all it means. In fact, over the centuries, the only people who would have referred to what my ancestors did as witchcraft would have been outsiders, especially people in the church and in the Roman Empire. For us, it was simply our way of life. We didn't label it as witchcraft or magic or anything else. And so challenge number 5 is just that: figuring out your identity and your tradition. I mean, the internet is rife with examples of religious witchcraft, neo-pagan traditions, covendom, and the political hazards that accompany such things. But what if none of that resonates with you? Then what? You could just ask some of the older folks in your family if you think that any of them practice the craft, but that leads us to challenge number 4. What if you can't find a practitioner among your ancestors and your family? Sometimes the stories passed down through generations tell us that so-and-so in our family was the person that people went to when they needed healing, or maybe when they thought they had the evil eye or they were being cursed. Many times the stories tell us of prayers or rituals that ancestor would do to help the person heal or recover. Sometimes it was as simple as grandma had a secret recipe for tea or a soup that cured pneumonia during the Spanish flu or something along those lines. But if that relative passed on and never passed down the secret, well, then what? That's where you have to take a deep breath and give yourself some space to figure it all out. Maybe that's the reason you found this video. The number 3 challenge comes when you're trying to learn your path by reading books and blog articles and nothing else. Again, 90% of what's out there on Amazon and popular blogging platforms, even on YouTube, is going to come from a neo-pagan pop culture witchcraft perspective. And that's because it's the most recent, it's the most popular, and because it's a religion, the most codified version of the craft that we have access to today. And there is nothing wrong with that. But if religion is not what resonates with you, then you're not going to find what you're looking for. Modern witchcraft was created in the 1940s and the early 50s, and despite some of the more fanciful, sometimes absurd claims to the contrary, nothing that even remotely resembled what we think about when we talk in terms of Wicca or Alexandrian magic or Gardnerian witchcraft or any of the other 20th century traditions or 21st century traditions would have been part of the practice of witchcraft in the ancient world. And I tell you that as a person whose doctorate is in anthropology. So let's just stop for a second, because at this point, not only does what I just said make some neo-pagans lose their shit a little bit, but it's also not as simple as it sounds. And so we have to be really careful about interpreting what I just said. The ancient world had nothing to do with covens or groves as it pertains to witchcraft. It had nothing to do with worshiping the gods or goddesses as part of witchcraft. And it certainly, witchcraft in the ancient world certainly didn't begin with women practitioners, despite the 1960s narrative that tried to pretend that the first witches were women. But in the ancient world, the magical worldview is what we often overlook. The magical worldview was not compartmentalized the way that it is today. In many parts of the world, the magical practice wasn't something we did in front of an altar or while we're dressed up in special clothing. In fact, nobody in the ancient world would have put on special clothes or traveled to a coven to perform their magic, because their magic was something they did all day, every day. When they took their bath in the morning, they were taking a ritual bath. When they made dinner, they were performing magic. They were blessing and imparting magic into the food they ate. When they went out on the hunt, same thing. When they were studying, same thing. Magic was a part of every breath that we took, and part of the everyday life of some of those primitive ancestors would have also involved religious superstitions, such as a belief in or worship of gods or goddesses. So in the ancient world of Italy, for example, the precursor to what we now think of as churches or temples or synagogues and mosques would have been the grove, what we call in Italian the boschetto. And that's where people from a town or a village gathered in the woods to pay homage or worship their local gods and goddesses. And among those who practiced those religions would have surely been bakers and hunters and shopkeepers, teachers, and yes, even the village healer or the village witch, the midwives, the medicine women and the medicine men, the mystics of that town. If that was their religion, then when they came to the boschetto, they came to the boschetto as a practitioner of magic or healing or card reader or whatever it happened to be. And so that means that if an outsider happened to stumble across a religious gathering, as Charles Leland did, and came from an Abrahamic religious tradition perhaps, the whole thing might have been mistaken for a gathering of witches, since the official narrative of the ruling class, that class being the Roman Empire or the church, called witchcraft anything that didn't fit neatly into the dogmatic religious views of that religion. And so to our ancient ancestors, it was just their version of religion, and that religion would have included some witches. If we look far enough back, we find out in the Code of Hammurabi that the word witch was referring to somebody who was a poisoner, somebody who inflicted harm upon somebody unfairly. In the 20th century, we see for the first time attempts to merge the ancient religious practice of the boschetto, the covens, with an occult practice or an occult study and magic. And that's where we get ceremonial magic, covens, initiatory witchcraft. It was born in the 20th century. So what do you do if none of that vibes with you? Well, the first thing you do is you have to have respect for those traditions, because whether they were created yesterday or they were created in the 40s and 50s, or they were created thousands of years ago, somebody else's spiritual path is their spiritual path, so you respect it. But you seek out qualified mentors who can show you some of the older traditions if the religious tradition doesn't vibe with you. In general, that becomes the second challenge, finding legitimate folk magic practitioners. Now, folk magic's another word for practical magic. So I always like to tell people that you could tell a person's age and you could tell where they kind of fit into the magical world by whether the movie that really made it click for them was was The Craft or was Practical Magic, because those are kind of the two best examples I can think of, illustrations of the difference between those two practices. So folk magic's another word for practical magic or natural healing or working with the spirits and energies of the land, the spirits or energies of your home, and the ancestors, including the ancestors whom legend and superstition might have turned into gods and goddesses. And we'll talk about that in another video. And it's only a challenge to find mentors in that tradition because most folk magic traditions are a matter of family or regional practice. And so they sometimes get interpreted as, as being closed practices. And the reason for that is over history, many of our ancestors learned that if they were open about what it was they were doing, they would get oppressed or even suffer bodily harm or lose their lives at the hands of the religious institutions, the church, the Roman Empire. So people have come to me for the past 25 years to learn Italian witchcraft, for example, only to have me explain to them when they say, John Michael, I want you to teach me stregoneria. And I would explain to them the word stregoneria is the Italian word for witchcraft. It's not a specific type or tradition of witchcraft like Gardnerian witchcraft or Alexandrian witchcraft or Wicca. In Italy, I can think of 20 or 30 different traditions or approaches to magic, many of them differing from village to village or even family to family, and it's all called stregoneria by outsiders. It's seldom called anything by the practitioners themselves. It's just our way. We might say fallu santucci, a little holy thing that we do. So it's useful to find somebody who's willing to be generous with their time, to mentor you the way that a child or a teen growing up in a family tradition would be exposed. So and the reason for that is this is not something you want to learn A, B, C, D. This is not a dogmatic practice, but you want your natural talents, your natural skills and powers to develop organically rather than focusing on a rigid belief system. That's religion. That's not what we do in folk magic. And so for most people, that means talking to some of the people that a particular practitioner has taught in the past to see if you vibe with their approach and see what those people have to say about that particular teacher or mentor. But now let's get to the most important thing, and that is the number one challenge of being a postmodern witch. And for me, the number one challenge of being a postmodern witch is something that stops a lot of people dead in their tracks. And that's realizing that your path will always, always, always be uniquely yours. See, you can't look for validation or approval, especially not from religious or pagan witches, because your path might differ from theirs and they might not be as generous with their encouragement as you would like. They may not even know how to support you in a tradition that's so foreign to their own. Because let's face it, most of the people that come to modern pop culture witchcraft came from the Abrahamic religions where they learned their entire lives dogma and doctrine and religious rules and just sort of this rigid structure. So when somebody comes and they say, no, I don't want any of that structure, I want to organically practice magic, they don't always know how to deal with you. But don't become like them, because there are absolutely some incredible, gifted, truly legitimate practitioners of pop culture witchcraft, some of whom have even started their own amazing coven traditions and coven religions for those who are just not looking to cultivate their magical powers, but maybe who want the security of a religion. And you just have to seek them out. And if that's something that you're looking for, go ahead and shoot me a message, and I'll be happy to point out some great resources to you. Drop a comment below and say, I'm looking for a coven. And I'll point you in the direction of some fantastic people. But if that doesn't sound like you, if you're more like me, the good news is that in recent years, a growing number of practitioners of non-religious, post-denominational, postmodern witchcraft, magic, sorcery, root work, conjure workers, and healing practitioners have become more visible thanks to social media, including a group of 5 respected teachers from different and really culturally diverse traditions who joined with me about a year ago to form a small community of a dozen or so people, which has already grown to about 50 people now around the world a year later. And what we did was we created an intentional community, which we call the collective, because it really is a collective. It's a gathering of a truly organic grassroots community of people from different paths. Some of them secular, some of them religious, some of them pagan, some of them not, with no hierarchy, no guru, no authority structure. That a group that's just designed to simply encourage and support one another in finding our path and recognizing that our path can change from time to time. There's healers, there are card readers, root workers, energy workers, plant magic practitioners, midwives, psychics, artists, and teachers that are part of our collective. And most of all, we're like family. We have fun, we hang out together, we get together once a week and talk about whatever it is that we want to talk about. And there's lots of laughter, lots of lots of craziness, lots of off-color jokes. It's like hanging out with your family. So my encouragement to you is hang in there. I guess the point of this video is that no matter what the challenge, you're never really alone. And if this vibes with you, then maybe check out the video series that I did on my tradition. It may not be a good fit for you, but it might inspire you further on your own journey. And be sure to like and subscribe and all of that stuff, and hit the notification bell so that you can stay in touch with us. We would love that. But before you go, I would really love it if you would drop a comment below and let me know what kind of witchy topics you wish you could find more of on YouTube and social media, because that'll help me to ensure that you always find interesting stuff on our channel. It'll help me make the channel better, and it'll help me serve our community better and our community at large. And I look forward to meeting some of you if you want to take this conversation to the next level. Thanks for tuning in. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.